Dr. Robert Epstein saw this coming. Epstein is one of the world's foremost experts on the effect of big tech on politics. Epstein is not a partisan Trump supporter. In fact, he's a Democrat. But he believes in democracy, and for years he has warned that Silicon Valley could steal this election. This is what he said when we spoke to him about a year ago.
Google and similar companies like Facebook are completely unregulated in the United States, so they can do whatever they please. And if they all work together in 2020 to support the same presidential candidate, which is very likely, and probably it'll be a candidate that I support, by the way, they can shift upwards of 15 million votes with no one knowing that they've been manipulated and without leaving a paper trail for authorities to trace.
Dr. Epstein has tracked the effect he says Google has had on this month's presidential election, and he joins us now to explain what he's found. Doctor, thanks so much for coming on. What effect do you think, have you measured, of big tech on the voting outcome this month?
Well, a couple of things that we've looked at so far. First of all, we had 733 field agents in 3 key swing states this year, Arizona, North Carolina, and Florida. And we preserved more than 500,000 ephemeral experiences. That's a lot. That's about 30 times more data than we got in 2016. And we're finding a couple of things that are pretty clear. Number one is that Google's search results were strongly biased in favor of liberals and Democrats. This was not true on Bing or Yahoo. The bias was being shown to pretty much every demographic group we looked at, including conservatives. So in fact, conservatives got slightly more liberal bias in their search results than liberals did. How do you account for that? And then we also found what seems to be a smoking gun. That is, we found a period of days when the vote reminder on Google's homepage was being sent only to liberals. Not one of our conservative field agents received a vote reminder during those days. The good news is, on that 4th day that we were monitoring, we went public with some of our findings, and Google backed off. They literally shut off that manipulation that night, and so for 4 days before the election, they were showing vote reminders to everyone, finally.
What effect, and we're thankful that you are apparently the only person monitoring this. It controls Google single-handedly controls our view of the world, and yet no one seems to care. But what do you imagine the effect, what have you measured the effect of this manipulation had on the outcome of the election?
Well, there are multiple manipulations here. We were also monitoring YouTube this time, and Facebook, and Bing, and Yahoo. The bottom line at the moment is that these manipulations, the ones that we've so far quantified, could easily have shifted at least 6 million votes in just one direction. That's the bare minimum at this point that I'm confident of. The maximum, we haven't even begun to estimate that yet because we have so much data to look at.
So that's the margin of the election right there. So you're saying that what you feared could happen may indeed have happened, that the manipulations from one company, Google, may have determined the outcome of the presidential election.
Well, we've been told this for nearly a year by whistleblowers from Google. We've seen it in leaked documents from Google, leaked videos from Google. There's no question that they set about after the 2016 election to make sure that President Trump, whom I do not support, by the way, to make sure that he is not reelected. And the massive amount of data we've collected is consistent with what the whistleblowers and leaks have been telling us for a long time now. So yes, the answer is yes.
So why is this not at the top of the concern of anybody who cares about democracy? Why are we allowing this to happen, do you think?
Unfortunately, the answer is pretty obvious. Google literally buys candidates and politicians, and my colleagues, my fellow academics, are often bought by Google with large grants. So, you know, the fact is that if you're a Democrat or you're a liberal, you like what Google and to some extent these other tech companies are doing. You like it. It's to your advantage. You know, the problem, though, is that we don't know who Google is going to be supporting tomorrow. And in fact, in different countries around the world, they don't necessarily support liberals. In some countries, they support conservatives. In China, they've worked with the Chinese government to help surveil and control the Chinese population.
This is the story right here. Dr. Epstein, I hope that you get the funding that you need to continue this research. I think it's hard to think of many things more important, and I hope that changes are made immediately. Or this is
well, we've moved into Georgia, so we're now monitoring the Georgia runoff. So we're doing our best.
I hope that you will. Thank you. So big tech clearly influenced the outcome in this election. That should be shocking and unacceptable to anyone who believes in democracy or good government, and yet it was essentially celebrated by the national media, which shared the goal of removing Trump from office. Cheryl Atkinson is the author of the book Slanted: How the News Media Taught Us to Love Censorship and Hate Journalism. She joins us tonight. Boy, that title is chilling but true. Cheryl Atkinson, thanks so much for coming on. What effect do you think the tech companies had on this election?
Well, I think it was big, looking at it in a non-forensic way. Dr. Epstein knows a lot more about all of that than I do. But just looking at the influence that they've had over the past couple of years after a concerted campaign that began in 2016 on the part of political and corporate interests to try to control the internet landscape, the information that we get online. Because these forces knew that once they had largely controlled the terms of how we talk about news stories in news divisions and on TV and on cable news, that there was still this place they saw people were getting unfettered access to off-narrative information, studies maybe they don't want you to see or know about, opinions that maybe they don't want you to have or know about. And so they set out their goals to then move into the internet in a way like we hadn't seen before, in a very overt way in those weeks before the election, in fact, to try to control that information landscape as well.
I don't know how frequently we can sound this alarm. I hope something's done about it soon, but give us an example of what they did in the weeks before the election, if you would.
Well, there are plenty of ways and hidden ways that every day our information is controlled. And it's, for example, Google actually made this announcement when coronavirus hit that they were going to direct searches to the World Health Organization, which in retrospect admitted to WHO it had gotten certain things completely wrong. But that's where we were being directed because of the partnership that they developed, because interests wanted us to go there and believe that. But right before the election, in ways that weren't even partly hidden, I felt like there was a sense of desperation because the tech companies began overtly censoring and taking down accounts rather than just sort of minimizing them or minimizing their reach in ways that couldn't be denied. So look at the New York Post story on Hunter Biden. And the audacity of that, but to not even care in those couple of weeks leading up to the election that we saw exactly what they were doing, because they knew there would be no repercussions for that before the election and perhaps none, quite frankly, after the election.
It's absolutely shocking. Do you think that there's any way to rein this in before the next election, even before the runoff in January in Georgia that will determine control of the Congress?
Well, I doubt before the runoff, but if we're looking 4 years down the road, there are a lot of strong technical minds and independent journalism minds and information people who are looking for all kinds of new ways where information can be disseminated without being curated by these self-appointed parties who have their own conflicts of interest, where people won't be deplatformed if they simply share factual information, or, hey, if they want to share information that's not true, but leave it up to you to discern what is and isn't and the research that you want to do, rather than letting these unnamed, faceless people with conflicts of interest do it for you. There's a lot of people searching for ways to do that, and I do think something new will be born of all of this.
Man, it can't come too soon. Cheryl Atkinson, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
If you're a Trump voter and you suspect that this election was stolen, was rigged, you're onto something.